And I begin by acknowledging the first Australians on whose lands we meet and whose cultures we celebrate as the oldest continuing cultures in human history. Where I work at present in New York, not far from the United Nations building, where 193 nation states meet, no one else can say that. No one else in the world. That we have the privilege of sharing this continent, ancient Gondwana land, what we now call Australia, with the oldest continuing cultures in human history. And for us whitefellas, that's a privilege. Thank you. To all aunties present, all uncles present, fellow Australians, one and all. If there are any of you here who doubt why an apology was necessary, then to listen carefully to what Brian had to say just before, I think would have answered your question and would have dealt with any doubt that you may have. For all of our differences here, Labor, Liberal, black fellas, white fellas, blokes, non-blokes, we're human beings. And in us beats a human heart, which if incapable of understanding pain and suffering, then we simply deny our humanity. And so for me as just a lad from Yamundi, up the road a bit, and as a young kid who grew up in country Queensland, who had very little contact with Indigenous Australians, for me it was simply meeting and speaking with members of the stolen generation and hearing their individual stories, which just made it transparently obvious that to deny an apology would be to deny our humanity. And to deny our humanity would have been to deny what we truly are as Australians. So, Brian and others who have shared their stories this morning, thank you. It's a telling reminder of why that was so necessary. Each of these lives is so important. Here we sit at Cranbrook Place. The stories have been mentioned about it. Each of those little babes, little ones, like the boys thrown into open sewers in the orphanage to which you were sent, Brian, each of their lives is important, intrinsically important, because these are our brothers and sisters, these are our fellow human beings, these are members of the same family. And so when I stand on places like this, as I've done in similar places around Australia, I'm always moved by the physicality of place, to know that here there was unspeakable suffering. And in my race's name, another reason why an apology was absolutely necessary. And you know, having grown up in Queensland, let's call it an earlier and less gentle age, and I think those of us of a few years can remember what that was like, and understood the hard, harsh racism of the times. You know, it's so good to be here and see that hearts are changing and in so many cases have changed. Which all proves one core proposition for me, which is that these things are doable. Any of us who feel that the business of reconciliation is so impossible to achieve, I think in our heads we're hauling up the white flag and we are adopting a culture of national learned helplessness, that somehow we can't fix a problem. My simple argument to each and every one of you today, and through what we do here today to the nation at large, is that we, as Australians, can achieve full reconciliation. We, as Australians, can achieve a full closing of the gap. And if you look at what we have done so far, in the space of a decade or so, yes, there is legitimate grounds for concern, but there are equal grounds for hope about what can be done. As we sit here on the banks of this ancient Brisbane River, and it was called many things in Aboriginal times, depending on where you are and which reach of the river, to Goolawah or elsewhere. I cannot help in my mind's eye but think of John Oxley and the mob rolling up the river, a bunch of blackfellas on the side of the river, and this first encounter, and what it was like, what it became, yet what it can now become. There's been such unspeakable pain in Indigenous communities across this state, but now we hear so many stories of changed lives, and changed lives for the better. What is it to say that we are reconciled? It's worth thinking about. The word reconciliation rolls very quickly off our lips. It's almost part of our national vocabulary. I think reconciliation in my mind is when I encounter Sam, for example, as we've done many times, mate, over the years, and not always in 100% agreement, usually, but occasionally you've been wrong, mate. He reminds me it goes both ways. Too true, my friend, too true. It's for us to look at each other's eyes and simply to see ourselves as brothers and as members of the same community. And to see that the differences we bring are added riches to the cake. To be reconciled is not to ignore difference. It's not to ignore the fact that we come from different parts of the world, different parts of Australia, indigeneity, or a bunch of criminal full-bloods such as myself, as the son of convicts. They did my family history when I became Prime Minister. 5 convicts in my direct line. Sammy, you haven't got a problem by comparison. But a reconciled Australia is one in which we stare at each other's eyes, we look into each other's faces, and you might be black, I might be white, we might be various shades in between. But it actually genuinely doesn't matter. We actually see someone who we can learn from, who's now part of our family, to bring new experiences, a fresh perspective, a different perspective, in the case of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, an ancient perspective. And that should be, in a reconciled Australia, a matter of celebration. When we look at the process of reconciliation, we think of its earliest beginnings. Think of the '67 referendum. As a little kid, I remember going in with my father, who was a member of the Country Party, to vote in the Yamundi State Primary School, the 1967 referendum, and he voted yes. That was a small step. And then I go through to the following decade. Gough, Vincent Lingiari, Sand Through the Hands, the Racial Discrimination Act. Each of these things seemed hard, very hard at the time, almost impossible. And then land rights legislation, state and federal, Mabo, hard, impossible, could never happen, and then it did. And then a national apology to Indigenous Australians. and to the stolen generations. Hard, impossible, not really. Stick your hand up, put it above the parapets, you never know what's going to happen. And the country came with us. Closing the gap, the new hard thing. Progress here, regress there. Uluru. The challenge that is now giving effect to a constitutionally recognised national voice for Indigenous Australians. A Makarrata Commission. A treaty. Seems hard to some. I'm sure it is. If you're in the business of hard politics, if you're in the business of crafting community consensus, but my simple submission to all of us today is take heart from the fact that every single milestone in this journey towards a reconciled Australia has always seemed hard. I mean, Brian Quirk's with us. He's a Lib. He would have been crucified 20 years ago to be here with us today. You know, things change, mate. Good on you. And so each step along the way seems hard, seems impossible. And then we cross that bridge, and it never seemed that hard after all. And so it is with the steps which lie ahead of us today. Tomorrow I speak to the National Press Club in Canberra on the 10th anniversary of the apology. I'll speak at length about closing the gap. Let me simply say this though. There's nothing wrong with having hard targets to close the gap in Indigenous advantage in health, in education, in housing and employment and longevity. When people say, it's just too hard, of course it's hard. We had 210 years of alienation and oppression prior to that. Of course it's bloody hard. That's why the targets are there, to keep us honest, to become a benchmark for accountability to our national and state parliaments each year. What have we done? What progress have we made? Where has regress occurred? But I would say this to our Prime Minister today. Malcolm, closing the gap is about having targets to bring about real change based on continuity of political resolve, continuity of policy resolve, and continuity of funding resolve. That's how you close the gap. So friends, my simple message to all of you today is to be strong and of a good courage. Be of good heart. We've come a long way. Uncles and aunties here who grew up in times past know how far we have come and know still how far we have to travel. But these things that we call reconciliation are doable. And with women and men of good heart and good soul, black fellas and white fellas together, and those of us in between, by God, we can turn this country into something great in the eyes of the world.